Hi, I'm Erin Marcus, former corporate executive turned entrepreneur and founder and CEO of Conquer Your Business. Welcome to the Ready Yet podcast. We're excited to bring you more than 100 episodes of interviews and insights designed to help entrepreneurs get the financial and emotional freedom they need in order to build a business and a life they're proud of. All right. Welcome to this episode of the Ready Yet podcast. I'm excited about conversation today with Spencer Carpenter, my guest. We finally had to hit record so we can share all this goodness with everybody. And before we get into all the cool things we're going to talk about, why don't you tell everyone who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Aaron, thank you very much for having me on the show. My name is Spencer Carpenter, and I'm the founder of Outlier Audio, which is a full-service podcast booking agency for rock star entrepreneurs, business professionals, and investors.
Love it. So the thing that I want to get into with you that we were chatting about that I find I know that you did this a while ago, but I suddenly found myself immersed in a group of people feeling this way again, is the idea of what do you do for a living when what you do for a living goes away? Not, I don't want to do this anymore. Not, I got fired from my job. That's different. You can go get another job doing the same thing. But like the whole thing goes away.
Yeah.
So if you want to share a little bit of your origin story on that, and we can dive into that. I think people are feeling that again for a variety of different reasons.
Yeah, so my background is I was in the music industry for 15 years, and I started off booking concerts in my hometown and scaled that up to doing multi-day music conferences and festivals. And I ran some small record labels and stuff like that. But pretty much all along the way, I was dealing on either side of talent representation. And in 2020, I was booking a club in Atlantic City, and unfortunately, my boss passed away, which we later on learned was from COVID. And then 3 days later, the whole industry got shut down. And so, while for a lot of people, especially in the music industry, it was when does music come back? But for me specifically, I didn't even know if I had a job because my employer was no longer around. And so, I had a few months at home, just taking it all in, seeing
Well,
what
shell
was going to
shock. I
happen.
think and that's a really good point. I think you have to make space for shell shock in these
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah, I've also been working since I was 15 years old. I now had the first excuse in my entire life to just sit on the couch with no expectation. And
And
so,
also the lack of ability to go anywhere, right?
yeah,
So all of a
yeah,
sudden you
couldn't
have
go
all this
anywhere
time,
anyway.
right? You have all this time on your hands and you don't even get to do anything with it.
Yeah. And so for part of this was I just got bored. And I was like, but also it was like, when does music come back? Do I have a job? There are all these unknowns. And Outlier Audio was actually a domain I bought probably 10 years ago when I was in network marketing and I was surrounded by young entrepreneurs and we were listening to audios from Jim Rohn and Bob Proctor and Eric Worre. And I was like, I could start like a record label for the next generation of young entrepreneurs. They don't have to be these people that are in the industry for 30 years for us to put out their audio now. And it just never came to fruition. And while stuck at home, I was going to repurpose that domain for putting out audiobooks because personally, I don't really enjoy reading as much as I like listening to an audiobook. And there are lots of people that could still benefit from putting out a release, but without the cost of the pages. So while people were stuck at home, I was like, help them put out audiobooks. And then someone else just said to me, you should help people get booked on podcast. And I'm not someone that just jumps into things without wanting a case study, wanting to think on it a little bit. But this moment they said that, I was like, oh yeah, I could totally do that. And I didn't think of it as jumping into PR because I wasn't doing all the rest of it. It was no different to me than when I used to do tour booking, where I would convince a venue owner in St. Louis to open their club on a Tuesday night to metalcore bands that they've never heard of. This seemed way easier. I just have to email them and they say yes or no.
This is much easier than that. Yeah, this is a good point.
Yeah, no negotiation on money, just yes or no. And I just concluded if I have to send 200 emails for one person to get 5 interviews, I'll do that. That's totally worth my time right now. So started doing it.
Yeah, and so you're in the music industry, and the people who had me starting to see this recently are also in the entertainment industry, but I think a lot of industries go through this
Hmm.
whether it's from external forces such as a pandemic, which we're lucky to say is not a regular thing. It could be a recession that shuts down entire industries.
Hmm.
But what you serendipitously did was take a skill set
Hmm.
and just apply it to a different audience.
Yeah, the great thing about what I did in music as a concert promoter and label head and tour booking agent, and I even had a merchandising business for a little while, merch printing. I just learned a lot of skills that taught me how to survive. And it was hard to let go of the identity I had around being in music, but being a conference organizer and festival organizer, that was my title, but when you take a step back, it was more that I understood logistics. Understood scheduling, I understood looking at the various moving parts. And so I was able to apply that to a blockchain conference. I was able to apply that to a real estate conference after I made this shift into podcasting. Because a lot of the people I work with are in the real estate space. And so I've
Hmm.
been able to reutilize a lot of the skills I developed since I was 15 years old, just in an area where when it comes to entrepreneurship and business, there are fewer people. There's no one like looking at those people as talent. That was why I wanted to start this company.
So huge. You said that. It's so interesting how I don't know why. I don't have a theory around it, but I've noticed themes, right? All of a sudden I hear a lot of a certain type of content or a certain phrase. And I've been looking at this in my own business because I have found myself half in the world of these big business people
Hmm.
and half in the world of talent and creatives. And I'm working on both sides of this. And I'm like, there's such a big miss. There
Hmm.
is such a big, in both directions. There's a huge miss in the small business world by not learning from how talent works.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then flip that around, there's a lot of problems I'm watching talent bookers and people who do this for a living have by not having good business practices.
Yeah, and the talent agencies are picking up a little bit. There are now agencies dedicated to negotiating brand deals for influencers, which
Right.
is just a different type of talent.
It's
But
just a different
when
type of talent.
Yeah, when I found podcasts, it was listening to real estate investing podcasts, and I just assumed everyone I was listening to was like Richard Branson or Mark Cuban. And then when I'd look them up on Instagram, I'd see they had 500 followers, and for lack of a better term, they were just Joe Schmo investor that was really good at what they did. Everyone in their circle probably says that person is loaded. That person is really good at real estate investing. That person, blah, blah, blah. You know what they never say? That guy's really talented.
Yeah,
And
it's this different
um
language.
and yeah, so I started seeing, and if you are Mark Cuban or Richard Branson, you're represented by a talent agency for
Right.
keynote speeches or whatever, but there aren't those services for financial planners or real estate investors or good attorneys. Some of them can hire PR companies, but that's really expensive and they do a lot of different things. And the other void I saw, especially from knowing a bunch of artists during COVID, was that they would ask their publicist to go get them podcasts because it was the only thing they could do. And in 2 years, they got them two of them because they've got a lot of other things on their plate. Publicists can handle written PR, TV, radio, speaking engagements. They handle a lot of things. But then for this new medium to come onto the space, that has millions of shows, but we'll just say hundreds of thousands of active shows. That's a lot of relationships and industry knowledge. If you were a publicist that does represent people that can get morning shows, there's what, a few dozen of them? I don't
Right.
have cable
I don't
TV.
know,
I don't
maybe
even know how
there's
to run
five. I
one.
don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. So the number of relationships you had to manage in that was pretty minimal. Now there's all of these podcasts, all of the authors that got on to all of those morning shows now have their podcasts, all the thought leaders. It's great because it's offered a lot of opportunities to everyone else, but it's a lot. I learn new shows every single day.
It's a lot. And what did you have to do internally? Because I think in the so I have two people in my world. Not that they listen to my show, so I could name them, but still, I have two people in my world, close in my world, who, and this is a job example. and then we'll make the bridge. But they were in a small business. That business, they were the top level management right under the owner. That business got sold. They're now working with the new owner who's an imbecile and ruining the company. And it's right out of some kind of bad TV show. And one of these people really identifies themselves as their job. And she's miserable. I think she finally left. And the other person has a job, right? He goes to work to earn money so that he can be a father and a provider and a husband and a thing. And I think in the small, right, so he doesn't care that the new owner is an imbecile because he's getting paid. Whatever he does during the 8, 9 hours he's there, he does. He doesn't. He doesn't take it home with him. I don't think we have that luxury in the small business world. I think as an entrepreneur, small business owner, you and your business, there's not a whole lot of separation. So what did you have to do to let go of the identity you had in order to even be open to this new opportunity? Because people get real tied up, right? Especially in something that's a passion as well as a job.
I had at the time that I was booking, when the opportunity came to book that club, I was doing a lot of things. I had a photo booth rental business. I was Ubering. I'd actually taken a step back
You're
from
one of
music for a
those.
couple of years. Oh yeah, jackass of all trades. I did whatever I could, and I'd taken a step half out of music, and then this opportunity presented itself, and so I went full into it. And it was like I worked my ass off for 9 months to try and make this. It was a really challenging position too, because Atlantic City is not a pop in place. It was a brand new club. I was tasked with trying to make it work. And the day before we were going to have our first show that made money, it all got shut down. And
That's hard.
um,
That's
so
brutal.
I just, what you're saying about the person that did really identify with the job, the reason why they had a really hard time with it is because they cared about either the company or the position or what they did. The person that identifies not with their job,
They don't
it's
care.
almost like it's ignorance is bliss. They're like,
Right.
whatever. If the company goes under, that's a problem. But as long as I did what I was supposed to do and nothing more, we're good. So it's just two different personality types there. But stepping back from music and looking at what it was, it's a highly competitive, doesn't always pay the best. You're not always working with the best personality types, multiple bad personality types, not just in the
Per
artist, but also
person, not just right per multiple bad personality per person, not
yeah,
even
yeah.
the industry.
Every band has multiple people, which means possibilities for multiple bad personality types. And then their representatives can also be bad. Some are great. It's not everybody,
Right.
but I knew that I liked working with entrepreneurs and business professionals and they're self-starters. And so while I talk about this being talent, I'm not managing talent the same way at all. If someone doesn't have the link to their Zoom meeting because they lost an email, they know how to search their email and go find it. It's a very different type
That sounds very specific as far as the energy behind that.
yeah, there are some people that need all the hand holding. That's
Oh
not the
yeah.
case with entrepreneurs. And
No.
I started booking concerts when I was 15 because I wasn't good enough to be in my cousin's band. Like I wanted to be involved though. And so I developed, while I have all these different skill sets, what I've always done is supported other talented people with whatever talents and resources I had. And so this for me was just an ability to, or an opportunity to shift that into supporting a different type of talent. And so the identity shift was like, once I realized that I was getting away from things I didn't like in music to go work with people that there's obviously some other types of
Right.
ego in small business and entrepreneurship, but it's much more warranted if you ask me. And there was some personal development there for them to get to that ego. And so it's been a cool shift for me because I still get the same satisfaction of supporting talented people get their information out to the world. It's not it might not be music and it might not be live performances the way it was for 15 years, but I'm helping people get their word out, their information, their education, whatever it might be, their message out into the world, and it helps other people.
I love it. And I think it's so important to know, even to me, it's still important to know so you know what drives you. Where is that intersection between your skill set and what other people, how it could help, how it could be of service?
Yeah.
And just knowing that. And I'm watching this, we were chatting. I think currently, if I had a pick, it's AI doing this to people now, right? I know some folks who were in the production world, entertainment world, production world. And so they had this writer's strike. They had COVID, then they moved into a writer's strike. And they're coming out of that to see that they're replacing 5 people per team with one AI $15 tool.
Mm-hmm.
And if your identity is wrapped up in, I press this button for a living, not, I know how to solve these types of problems.
Yeah, I still think though that you're right. There's certain sectors that are going to be impacted by change, but that videographer, do you know how many small businesses like are
I
looking for
saw
a $500 video
Oh my
product?
God.
Like,
I've been screaming from the rooftops at these people going, you don't understand how much better you are at this
mm-hmm,
than the people who are selling those services
mm-hmm,
10, 20, $30,000 at a time.
mm-hmm.
And you're so much better at it than they are.
Yeah, and I do recognize that this takes a little bit of that development of the entrepreneurial bug or business understanding. Like my friend left a job in teaching a year and a half ago to go full time into his uh, wedding videography business. And that's what he wants. He actually really wants to work with more small businesses, but weddings are what pay him right now. I'm like,
Right.
yeah, but if you were to go to your dentist down the street and set up like an hour-long interview process and make content for it and film it in your home studio, you could charge them 3 grand and they have the budget for it. And it's an opportunity for them to stand out in a boring industry as to why they're better. They get to talk about why they like teeth more. I don't know. But
Or why in the world they even went with teeth.
yes, you can do that for your optometrist, you can do that for your dentist, for your lawyer, for the CPA, for the financial planner in your heavily congested area in the suburb of Philadelphia. And you'll make money and you'll figure it out along the way. And if you can do more weddings, great. If you can do more small business stuff, great. But this goes back to none of those people are looking for AI to make a product video of their
No.
business. They
Mm-mm.
still need someone like you. You
Because,
just
right,
have
they
to,
need the guide.
yes. And now you're not the videographer for a movie, but zoom out again, take the identity away from it. You're still a videographer.
Yeah. And as I'm listening to you, what is occurring to me that you didn't do. And so why did it work? Because you didn't get stuck here. People become myopic staring at the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that you've been talking about is look in the other direction at all the possible solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And people get so trapped, right? They tell their brain that they have this big, huge problem, and then the brain goes about proving them.
I joked that I was successfully unemployed for several years. I had a consistent stream of inconsistent income. So again, I ran shows, I did some drop shipping, I did some merchandising, I did dog sitting, I did Ubering. Like at the end of the day, if everything falls apart, I can go back to Ubering, which I loved. Like
But
people
it
paid me to
creates
sit in my
risk
car and listen to
tolerance.
music. Yes,
It
exactly.
creates risk tolerance, right? This
What
is
are the options though? Like where can you always come back
right.
to if you need to?
Instead of our brain convincing us that if this one thing doesn't work, I'm going to be homeless living in a van under the bridge down by the river, because that's what we think. And you'll never let it get there, because if the worst thing that happens to you is you can go get a job at Target because it comes with a discount, right? This is not a bad option.
I think Dan Martell said something the other day. The worst case scenario is you have to get a job like the rest of the
Like,
population.
like most people, right? And it creates two things. It creates self-trust, because you know that you will always be okay. Even if you're momentarily not thrilled with what you're doing for a living, you do know you'll be okay. So it creates
Hmm.
that self-trust, and it creates you a safety net for risk tolerance,
Hmm.
which people don't value. It's part of the game. You got to do that.
Hey, it's a skill set in
Okay.
itself.
Oh, please. So what are you having the most fun with like now that, tell me more about who you're representing and what you're having fun with doing that.
Yeah, so half of my clientele is in the real estate space just because I'm a novice investor myself and I know a lot about it. I can craft their stories well and their topics well, which is part of what I do when I work with clients is I help get their pitch calibrated, not too long, not too short, take out the stuff I don't think matters, and craft topics that I think the host or the audience needs.
Nice.
And it can't just be like, I can talk about sales, I can talk about marketing. It's got to be, there are obviously some places where a surface level conversation makes sense, but I don't want that to be what I'm pitching. I want to pitch more expertise.
Yeah.
And the other half of the clientele I work with is like anyone in the entrepreneurship space or small business space, but also plenty of thought leaders. I know that's very broad, but that's because there's not many people that do what I do. And in terms of what's been fun is I've been working with Brandon Novak, who is in the Jackass movies and the TV
Oh,
show Viva La Bam. And he was on opioids for 20 years and getting punched in the face on TV. And now he's 10 years sober. He's got a recovery home. I'm sorry, 6 recovery homes and a recovery center.
wow.
And so I get him on on shows to talk about that comeback story. But I also
Well, to
love
your
being able
point
to,
that you just made, like that is intriguing and amazing and not tactical, transactional. How do you do this thing? People want to
no,
hear
no.
that.
But what I love though, where I really get excited is then I take him to the shows that are more entrepreneurship and small business based, because there are plenty of people that addiction isn't
Rampant.
discriminatory. It hits
Right.
everybody, or it can hit everybody. But the people in the entrepreneurship space never thought of, and we're never going to have the opportunity to interview the degenerate from Jackass. But I love being able to bring that into the fold. And then vice versa. I deal with John Foley, who is the lead solo pilot of the Blue Angels. And so he's like a top 10 keynote speaker. He speaks to tons of Fortune 500 companies. But while it's tons of people talk about leadership, not many talk about it from the perspective of flying $1 billion plane at 500 miles an hour, 18 inches from another jet.
Yeah.
That's trust building. That's leadership.
That's a
Yeah,
different, yeah. That was there. They were, I grew up watching them, in Chicago, we have an amazing air and water show every year. And then I spent my summers in Washington, D.C. with the
hmm
Space Museum, and the Blue Angels were always that was always my thing. That was amazing.
Yeah. So I love being able to bring those opportunities as well. I love looking for that crossover.
So let's flip it. If there's one thing you could tell people, learn from what I did, don't do what I did, you'll be further ahead. What is some things that just haven't worked that you're like, just don't do this?
It's not that everything I've done is perfect, but there are certain areas that I've you really okay, so what makes me good at what I do is that I've always been intrigued at the way people make money.
Mm,
And someone out there is the number one ice chest producer of salesmen for
right.
7-Elevens on the East Coast. And it's not
Right.
sexy, but they're a millionaire. And so I love learning about that stuff. But there are certain areas where I have no interest in learning further. And for example, someone hired me that are in the cybersecurity space. And as much as I tried to get them to become more unique in their pitch and what they could pitch, they didn't know how, and I didn't know how to force them to.
Mm.
And so trying to fit a square in a circle hole, or whatever that expression is, that is, you can go and find a niche for just about anything, but it still has to be a niche that you're interested in. But you
Totally
can't
agree with you.
force yourself to, you can if you absolutely have to for a paycheck,
It's
but
not
I didn't want
sustainable
to.
though. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I don't think it's sustainable. I say that all the time. I don't know how to get people to come to your restaurant. I don't, right? There's certain things. Yeah. Is it a business? Yes. I don't do a lot with businesses that have massive inventory and manufacturing. There's just way too many parts of that accounting spreadsheet that I'm not interested in.
hmm hmm
Right. So knowing when you hesitated to answer, the thing that came to my mind is it's not that you haven't made mistakes, it's that you're so unattached to them, which in and of itself is like a huge lesson. You're so unattached to the things that didn't work. It's okay, that didn't work. And that has probably helped propel you to get to do all the things that you're doing now.
Yeah, and the inverse to it is, what I do right is I really figure out how to position people to be successful in podcasts. And quite frankly, I just assume that everyone I'm talking to is an adult and they can handle my
Totally.
feedback. Someone
Yeah.
came to me and they're very successful at course creation, and they're like good at content creation, but they made a course around course creation or content creation or something like that. And they came to me and they said, we've already really got a big following. We'd like to focus on like big podcasts. And they listed one off. It's a big business podcast, but they're interviewing like political figures and like other successful entrepreneurs and having general conversation while they are business people. And I just said to them, I'm like, I, I could be wrong, but I don't know if these people want to talk to you about course creation. That doesn't seem like the MO of the show. And so if that's the expertise, or I'm sorry, if that's the benchmark you're going to put on me, then I'm not the right guy, because I'm not saying that you aren't good at what you do, but what you're presenting isn't interesting to those people.
Right.
And so the inverse to what hasn't worked is I don't sign up for things that I don't think
Yeah.
everyone wants to actually hear about, or at least from an angle. If they had said to me that they want to be on more shows around marketing, I still have to assume that like everyone else that talks to people like them doesn't have their own course that they're selling and aren't going to look at it like competition. But it's the same thing I deal with some people that are like, can you get me on Joe Rogan? And they're like, sell insurance. I'm like, when was the last time you heard Joe Rogan talk about business?
Right.
Because he
He
doesn't care.
doesn't.
So
Right.
don't ask me for that.
It's the strategy. It's the strategy. The way what you're talking about is the way I describe it is you have to reverse engineer your strategy. And too many people start at step one and they instead of the end and then reverse engineer how to get there. They just too many, and yes, I 100% agree with you. I said I can sell anything as long as I care about the thing I'm selling.
Right.
And I will give a disclaimer and tell people to put their little safety bubble on before I open my mouth if I remember to. But I'm also a bit direct with the feedback, so I totally get it.
Yeah, I actually made a LinkedIn post about this the other day. Like my strengths or who I am, I think being straightforward is a strength of mine, and it comes through in my podcast pitches because I don't add fluff. I don't like fluff, and I delete it when people have it in there, and it makes my pitches more concise and people can say yes to them more easily. It's just, and sometimes people don't like when you're straightforward, but those are the people I don't want to work with
Right,
anyway.
they're
Like
not
if
your
they can't
people.
take it.
And to your other point, you're talking about how much effort and thought you're putting into who you represent and what you're doing for them. I can tell you as someone who gets pitched probably no less a week by email alone, that doesn't count LinkedIn and all the other ways. I can tell by looking at 95% of them, they've never even looked at anything other than the ranking of the show or that the show exists. Because if they did, they wouldn't send me what they send me.
This is going to be, I'm sure, I don't know if any other podcast booking agent out there has said this. I've booked over 1,500 interviews. I haven't heard every single podcast that I've pitched to.
Right.
However, I know enough about the industries they're in to understand what it is that I'm like 95% sure that my
Or just read the
person could
description.
be on the show. Yes.
Read, that's all. Read the
I
description.
check the
Read the
descriptions. I look
tagline.
at the shows, the
Read the
episode
tagline.
titles. Yeah, it's if you can read like 3 different things, like the description of the show, the titles of the episodes, and then maybe the description of
That's all you
the
need
episodes if you need to go further,
for a
you've
couple of
got
them.
like a 90% chance of knowing whether or not it's the right show. And there have been times where I was still wrong. There are sometimes different industries use the same term for different things, and I've gotten it wrong in that capacity. But it's even making that little bit of effort can go a long way and really increase your chances of being on a
Totally.
show.
Totally. So if people want to continue this conversation with you, learn more about how you help people, all the cool things you do, what's the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. It's just my name, Spencer Carpenter. Same thing with Instagram. And you can schedule a call or check out some of the people we work with at outlieraudio.com.
Cool. And we'll make sure all the links are in the show notes so you're one click away from everybody. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I love your
Thank you for
insight
having
and
me,
your
Erin.
approach. You're just, yeah, tell it like it is. Help people, right? Straightforward advice. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Ready Yet podcast. I truly enjoy bringing these stories of success and inspiration to you. Please join us in our mission to empower entrepreneurs to be in charge of their businesses and in charge of their lives by sharing this with anyone you know who would benefit from our tactical and motivating advice, leaving us a review, and letting us know if there are any particular topics you would really appreciate hearing about. See you next time.